Before we get into today's episode, I do want to warn you that you'll hear some bells in the background or some commotion in the background. I recently adopted two new kittens who are very playful throughout the day, and so just ignore any sounds you hear in the background. And also, I forgot to set up my proper lighting when I started the episode, and I fixed it about a quarter of the way through. So if the lighting seems a little bit all over the place, I'm still working things out on a proper filming spot. So just ignore it if you can, and if it bothers you, I'm sorry. And in the next episode, hopefully we have way less technical difficulties. All right, I hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome back to Museful, the art podcast, your art resource. I'm your host, Jaslabeth, and this episode, we will be discussing museum etiquette, the do's and don'ts of visiting a gallery. Roll the intro. Okay, let's talk museum etiquette. What is it? Why do we need it? The definition of etiquette is the customary code of polite behavior in society or among members of a particular group. Basically, it means the proper way to act in certain social situations, and this term will usually have a specific identifier next to it. For example, how talking about something gross or inappropriate over dinner is not proper. So it is dinner etiquette to keep the topic of conversation light. So today's episode is all about the proper way to behave in a museum, a gallery, or any artistic institution. The reason it is so important to have etiquette is because having the knowledge of how to behave is better than doing something and getting in trouble for it. You want your experience to be a good one, so being mindful of the people around you is so important so that everyone can have a good experience. This quote by Travel and Leisure really explains it well. As a museum goer, there are straightforward rules on how to behave, as well as unsaid common courtesies. These unwritten policies, which I once thought to be obvious, are more and more apparent to me with each visit, especially as other patrons break rules with outright awful etiquette. Museums can sometimes come off as rather pretentious institutions, but most of them are dedicated to the public. They have spent centuries preserving and perfecting history so that the public can access knowledge through exhibitions. And the history of the museum itself is pretty fascinating. The future of the cultural spaces is always evolving. So, moving on, what do you need to know before walking into a museum? Obviously, you'll want to know what kind of museum you're going to, the hours, admission information and policies. All of this information is always on the website. From my experience with art museums, information on the website is always up to date. So, how do you dress for a museum? A lot of people like to dress up between casual and formal and make a day of going to the museum to take pictures, look good, but unless there's an event happening, like an opening or an outdoor event, you can come in casual clothes. That's fine. However, if a museum has a specific dress code, I can assure you you will probably find that information on their website, easily accessible for you to find. So if it's not specifically mentioned, don't worry about it. Casual is fine. The last thing you'll need to know before entering the museum is to make sure you have your ticket or money to purchase the ticket at the front desk. You may or may not need ID. Some museums even offer a student discount, so make sure to bring your student ID. And if you're allowed, bring a sketchbook. You can draw inspiration from the artwork and do studies and maybe even create something new in the space that motivates you, surrounded by all the pieces. Okay. So you've made it to the museum, you walk through the doors. First thing to know is that it is time to quiet down. Inside voices don't disrupt the peace of other people around you who are studying works, who are there for a good experience. So the second thing is no food or drinks in the museum. A closed off water bottle is usually fine, but it's better if you put it in a bag and conceal it. We don't want an accident to happen in the museum where food crumbs get everywhere or liquid gets on the floors or the art pieces themselves. Once you've gotten your ticket, pay attention to the signs that you see. Sometimes a gallery has a flow and they want you to walk in a certain path to really experience the narrative, or they don't want you to use any flash photography. So just really pay attention to the signs around you because they will give you some information that you need to know. So we'll discuss more on that in depth later, but just something to be aware of. So now you're in the museum, you're standing in front of a piece. How do we go from here? Well, the first thing is to maintain a distance from the artworks themselves. Look at the floor. Sometimes there's a taped outline of how far back the museum wants you to stand. Some exhibits are roped off. Overall, just pay attention to the visual cues of how much distance you need to put between yourself and the piece itself. Second thing, do not, and I repeat, do not touch anything or assume you can touch anything. In fact, I would rather you assume that you can't touch anything unless it explicitly says it is an interactive exhibit. This one is pretty self-explanatory, but to put it clearly, the artist does not want your hands all over their art. You can mess it up, you can damage the artwork and not even realize it. So just keeping your hands to yourself and not touching things that do not belong to you is very important, and it shows that you are not only respectful, but that's just a normal rule that you should carry with you in society. Third thing, use of photography and flash. Some galleries within the same museum will allow photography while other galleries do not allow pictures to be taken. If you can take photos, don't use flash because the heat from the flash can actually affect the artwork. I've seen signage for all of these instances, ones that encourage pictures, no pictures, or no flash specifically, so pay attention to the signs around you. At the very least, you can always ask a person who works there or a security guard stationed around the gallery. As you're walking around, taking everything in, and multiple people are trying to see a specific piece, don't walk to the front and block everyone's view. You're allowed to get a closer look, but just wait until the onlookers in your group temporarily have moved on. Same with the gallery walking flow. Don't block the entire path. No one's in your way. Stay out of other people's way. It's just a common courtesy, but again, it needs to be said, so here we are. So next thing, don't take a phone call while in the gallery. Again, these are very quiet spaces. People are focusing on the artwork. They want to have a good experience, and then they don't want you just answering your phone and saying, "Hey, how you doing? How's it going today?" No, I'm not busy. I'm just in a museum. And also, you can't speak quietly over the phone. If you speak quietly, the person is more likely to not hear you, and then you have to say whatever you're trying to say louder, and then you're just disrupting the piece of the museum experience for other people. If you have a time slot specific ticket to view the exhibition, tell the caller you'll call back when you're done. That way you can just get back to them after you finish the specific time you're allowed to see the exhibition. However, if you don't have a time slot, or if it's an emergency or it's really important, just walk outside. Most museums allow you to come back inside as long as you have your ticket. Just try not to disrupt the piece. If it's a busy exhibition or a popular museum, there is usually a flow that you walk so that you can experience the exhibition. Please make sure to keep up the pace. Don't spend too long holding up the line, to be courteous of those around you and allow other people to see the art too. Obviously, if you're in a group or you have kids with you and they break these etiquettes, don't be afraid to let them know that, hey, it's time to quiet down. Don't disturb other people around you, so that way they have that knowledge, and so on and so forth. Any questions about the exhibition, you can always ask museum staff or a docent, which, in case you don't know, a docent is a person who acts as a guide, typically on a voluntary basis in a museum or an art gallery. Speaking of docents, you can also go on a guided tour with a docent who will give you in-depth information about each piece, the artists themselves, the time period, and much more. So if you like a well-rounded view of the exhibition, I would recommend going on a tour. If you prefer a more quiet solo experience, you can always explore independently. There are no disadvantages to one or the other. I even want to mention that some galleries use apps or audio guides. For example, I went to Snap Gallery here in Florida, and I downloaded an app called Fawn, where you hold up your camera on your phone to a specific poster and it comes to life. It was a very cool experience. I had such a good time using the app. So, keep an eye out for interactive exhibitions like that. If you run into any issues while at the museum, don't be afraid to report it to staff. They are some of the nicest people, and ultimately we all have the same goal in these museum spaces where we just want everyone to have a good time. It's a celebration of the art, and as long as nobody's bothering anyone around you, that's all it is like making sure that you're not disturbing anyone around you during this experience. Museums are very fun and they can be very, insightful, but overall, as long as no one's really bugging you or you're not bugging other people, it will be a smooth experience. That brings me into the last point of this video, which is reflecting on your experience after you visit. Find what you enjoyed during the exhibition, find what you didn't enjoy, and bring that knowledge with you into the future. Feedback is always encouraged by museums, so post about the exhibition or make it a friend hangout next time. Sometimes museums will even have a feedback box that you can participate in. If you're an art student who wants to go into the museum field, I highly encourage visiting the museum you want to work at 1 or 2 times so that when you inquire about volunteering, interning, or even working there, you already have familiarity with the museum. And this is something that you can bring up in your cover letter. Museums even welcome donations or starting a membership, and sometimes they even have these cool things where if you have a membership with them or a specific organization, you can get free entry into a bunch of other museums that they partner with. So look into those options for you, especially if you want to be a very avid museum supporter. All in all, visiting a museum can be fun, it can be insightful and inspiring, but understanding etiquette before going can make your experience even smoother, and you can just focus on enjoying the art to the best of your ability. If I missed any etiquette points or you'd like to share your own museum stories, comment down below. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of Museful, the art podcast, your art resource. Remember that I post on Wednesdays 3 times a month. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!